Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Theological Insomniac. This is number 6, I think, on the fun time that we have together on these casual evenings where we gather together. And, oops, I got a little feedback there. Let's see. There we go. See if that works better. And glad you're here. Boy, I got, what do I got? Got cables here showing all sorts of things here. We'll get organized. There we go. Is that better for you? Welcome to the Theological Insomniac. I'm Dr. Randy White, and I'm awake. Maybe you are too. And little crude operation here as we go from the shed on this Wednesday night. Had to stop and think about what day it was. And I am glad you're here. And my son, he's telling me about sound. So, hey, son, tell me how it sounds. Tell me if I need to adjust something. You know, all that kind of stuff. Glad you're here. What do you want to talk about tonight? We can talk about some good, fun stuff, no doubt about it, and have a good time. And that's what we do here. We talk about what you want to talk about. We're very casual. Let's talk about the normal. Let's talk about the abnormal. Let's talk about the paranormal. Let's talk about, I think we'll talk about some stars tonight. I think we should talk about some dispensationalism tonight. I think that we should talk, we'll probably have to talk about a little coronavirus tonight, don't you think? And it'll all be all well and good. We got Roger in Arizona falling asleep, and Daniel in Colorado says, let the insomnia begin. Oh, we can have so much fun, can't we? By the way, just because I get asked often, these are not pajamas. No, they're not pajamas. This is a chap's shirt. Everything looks like pajamas when you put stars and fluffy clouds there on it. It's just amazing. Hey, Joel's awake, 8:45 in Grand Rapids. Good to see a good fellow right divider there. And internet burping. No sound. Is that right? Let's see. Is that right? My sound guy, he's going to tell me. I don't know if that's everybody or if that's just you. Roger in Arizona. No, he says it's good. It's just you, Roger. Put your hearing aid in. You'll hear then. So, Joel, let's see. Here's a good topic to get started with. Joel says, has the Senate spent my grandchildren's money yet? You know, I don't think they have yet done it, but let's just go ahead and check real quickly here. And I'm just going to go to foxnews.com because that is easy. No, voting starts now, they say. And I assume this is probably all quite accurate. Massive stimulus package, Senate votes. Oh, no. When I clicked on it, here's what it says. Yeah, Senate to pass massive stimulus package. Oh, to pass. No, Senate passes. Okay. It keeps changing on me. I don't know. But it says 2 hours ago. Last updated 6 minutes ago. Okay. The Senate passed. Yes, they have spent your grandmother's, your grandchildren's money. The Senate has passed a massive $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus compromise package. That word right there ought to get us to say, okay, what's all in this? What's the part of the compromise? I read something earlier that Secretary Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, said something about, we lost some things or we had to give some things. And I was curious what those were. I have not really studied this. I did study the House bill. In fact, I read the entire House bill. This one, I understand, was something like 2,000 pages long, or at least 1,000 pages long. It was way up there anyway. And it's been a busy week. And so I decided not to do that. Okay, Joel says my audio is not good either. I wonder if that's only on Facebook. I keep getting a notification that something's not good there. I'm sending a note to the high tech. Yeah, it says live video interrupted there. I think we're having some problems with the Facebook feed. And we'll check that here in just a moment. I'm going to switch over so that I can see the other feeds there. Let's see. We don't do this on a real professional broadcast during the day, but this is not a real professional broadcast. This is one man in his shed. That's what it is. And we are going to talk about some nice things tonight, some fun things tonight. And I think that'll be good and exciting and fun and all well and good. Okay, I'm going to come back to you on Facebook for just a moment, and I am going to look over here on YouTube and see what you folks in the YouTube world have to say. Let's see. Stay at home, Colorado, as of tomorrow. Okay, I knew it was Denver. Now it's statewide, I suppose, in Colorado. Jeff's in Trinidad, so that's interesting. And Colorado, was fairly hard hit early on. And it looks like now, looking at our friend Douglas Frank, the highest he's got it right now in Colorado is 3,000 total cases. What is Colorado? Is there 3 million people in Colorado? 2.5, 3 million people is my guess. 33 total deaths. I suppose this is completely a guess. This was today at about what is that 8:07 p.m. I suppose it's this jump right here that caused the governor of Colorado to today, I'm assuming, lots of assumptions here, that caused the governor of Colorado to say, hey, we got to change things, we got to do something. My guess is that this is a little bit, I was going to say testing anomaly. This is exactly what Dr. Frank says, testing anomaly, that there perhaps was a little bit delay in turning in the tests or something in order to get those to jump that high. I think, and again, this is just a total guess on my part. Dr. Frank would probably have more to say about this, but I think probably it's still going to level out. He's got the peak of the new cases per day coming in about, I'm going to guess the 29th, somewhere around there. Now, that's the peak in the new cases per day. It's not the peak in total cases. That's off this chart here, which would reach up to 3,000. This only goes to 1,000. And excuse me, there I had a little Fox News alert. Senate passes $2 trillion coronavirus bill. Cha-ching, cha-ching. But that's what it looks like in Colorado. That would be my guess there, is the governor saw that, the governor jumped. Now, here's the problem with governors and with so many others. They look at the one-day jump and say, we got to do something. We got to do it now. Rather than looking at the model and saying, you know what, the model's got up and downs on the daily, but it seems to be tracking pretty closely to what the scientific hypothesis was. Now, a scientific hypothesis does not have to be right for you to be a good scientist. A good scientist will look at it eventually and say, nope, we put some bad assumptions into the model, and so we're going to change it. So that certainly can change. But a scientist also doesn't get scared by one day's data. He's looking at over time. And my guess is the governor of Colorado just looked at that one day and feels that pressure to do something. And that pressure to do something can be, I think, real tough there. So interesting up in Colorado there. Good to see Hawaii with us here today. You're not even an insomniac, are you? It's not time for you to go to bed, right? You're probably, what, just sitting down for supper, perhaps. Okay, Orlando, Tampa area, now in a stay at home tonight. And let's see see. I'm not sure if I can find. Yeah, here's the latest on Florida. Let me put that up. He says, just added the data, big spike in cases, no change in the death trends. Again, he says probably a testing artifact. I don't know if he meant anomaly there or if artifact is quite the word. So this huge jump right here in the cases today, the number of cases today jumped up. Let's see. He only has his projections. I don't know what the number of cases, but it looks like about 500 new cases today. So once again, they get worried. I noticed earlier as I was looking about this, there's some discussion going on about why it's a testing artifact, again to use that word, versus an early outlier in an upward trend. How many data points need to be out of fit before a more probable scenario is one of a similar breakout, like the Spain church? What he's saying is, hey, how many of these do we have to get before we prove this is not wrong? And Dr. Frank has not answered that, and so I'm just going to have to leave that to say I don't know. But again, we said, what is this? I think we were on Monday night. I'm not sure. Sunday night, Monday night, somewhere in there we were on. And one of the things we said as we were looking at some of this is that this week was going to be a bad week. And because it was going to be a bad week, the governors were going to panic. And I think we were right on there. Now, the question is, so far we're saying next week is going to be a good week. So the question is, will we be right or will we panic next week? Let's wait till next week to see. But I still don't think that there's any need to panic this week. I think this week, the rest of this week, I don't see a good day. I don't think the models predict a good day. So we're not to the point yet of coming downhill on that. If we do start going downhill, it's just a very big surprise and a very big bonus. So again, when you wake up tomorrow and you find out that your state, had another 500 cases or 200 cases or 50 cases or whatever it is, again, don't freak out. Just say, well, I heard on the Theological Insomniac that was supposed to happen. I'm prepared. I expected it, and hope you have toilet paper. Bruce up in Wisconsin, when you told the story about the deacons bringing you into the office for a meeting, I am curious, was that about dispensationalism? Let's see, that would have been 2007, if memory serves me correctly. I had become dispensational by then, not to the point of, let's call it, right division that I am now. In 2020, I was certainly trending in that direction. The model was. But really, that was, I think that was some of it, because I was teaching meticulously verse by verse, and this doesn't fit with the evangelical model. The evangelical model has more pizzazz to it. It has, these big concerts and, 8 smiling people up on the platform, all in color coordinated outfits, all with perfect smiles that they paid $10,000 to get. And there's a lot of showmanship in all of that. And then there's a lot of control, and there's a lot of, so it was really, I would say, more the fact that I had left the church growth movement, and that growing a big congregation that would have a name for itself was not my priority. And I would put it really more to that. I've thought about writing a book about those time periods. I don't know that I will. I don't know that it helps anybody, but me maybe. But there certainly is a playbook that these things go by through the years on how to get rid of your pastor, if you will. And It's unfortunate that it's there, and I don't know a single pastor who hasn't been through it at one point or another. And it's like statistics. You can pretty much chart it. Pastors call me and say, "Oh, I'm in trouble with my deacons or my board or whatever, depending on the leadership model that they use there. It doesn't really matter, honestly." And I can pretty much tell them what has happened to this point and what's going to happen. And the chart, you can go this path and this will happen. You can go that path and this will happen. And try to analyze it just a little bit for them, but it's pretty predictable. I would say that theology was down there under it because it affected my methodology. I don't know that it's so much even dispensationalism, though dispensationalism was my theology. So maybe you can't separate those, but I would say it was not directly tied to dispensationalism. Now, none of those men were dispensationalists, so maybe I'm just fooling myself. Maybe actually it was in that. On the sound issues we were talking about earlier, by the way, I believe that what it looks like, it's actually Facebook only. So if you're on Facebook having a problem, go over to youtube.com/Randy White. I think that's working fine. And it seems to be a Facebook anomaly. So you might want to switch over if you'd like. So back to spending your grandchild's money, is what Joel said. And Stephen in Florida says, "Are you kidding? Great-great-great-grandson's money, you mean?" And, one of the things that I would say about this, and let me see if I can bring up a book here. I'm going to have to do it on my phone because it's on Kindle. And so I won't be able to show you, but at least I will be able to give you the name. There is a book that I think is free on Kindle. And what's the name of this book? I don't use Kindle enough to know how to do it. There we go. Diagrams and Dollars, the ampersand sign for and. Diagrams and Dollars, Modern Money Illustrated by J.D. Alt, A-L-T. The initials J.D. and the last name Alt. Diagrams and Dollars, Modern Money Illustrated. Now, this particular book, it's 41 pages of an ebook. According to this, it takes less than an hour to read. It is a question the assumptions kind of book about economics. And I think it's fascinating. When I first started reading on this theory, it's called Modern Monetary Theory, I first started saying these guys are absolute loons. They don't have a clue what they're talking about. They think money grows on trees. And I was utterly dismissive of it. But for whatever reason, I kept reading it. I think because it was questioning the assumption. It was making me ask some questions about my economic model and what I thought. And let me say that I'm no economic expert, but almost thou persuadest me. I'm almost there on the theory that is diagrammed and written out in a pretty brief manner by that particular book. Once again, it is Diagrams and Dollars, Modern Money Illustrated. Diagrams and Dollars, Modern Money Illustrated by J.D. Alt. That's a Kindle book. I don't know if it even comes in print. It's a Kindle book by J.D. Alt. And I want to say it was a free book or very inexpensive anyway. And, while you're stuck at home in Florida or wherever it is, you might want to read that. Again, let me say you will disagree with it at first. It just doesn't sound right. What it actually says, however, is that sovereign governments like ours, like the federal government, this is not true of a state government because a state government is not sovereign, but a sovereign government can print money. And the value of that money, I'm not sure if that's in this book, but the value of that money comes from the ability to tax it in that particular currency. So when you, if you move to Mars and you start an economy and you are the sovereign government, then you can say our currency is widgets, and people say, we don't want widgets. As long as you're sovereign and can say, I don't care if you want them or not, but you owe a tax and you have to pay it in widgets. Therein lies the value of fiat currency. If the U.S. government ever loses its ability to tax, then it loses its ability to control its currency. Now, that's just one principle there. And it's interesting because it does go into national debt then and what happens there and the flooding of the market with money, and it talks all through that. And there are various ways you can fix it. You can pay back that money, so to speak, and it all managed. So I encourage you, since they're spending so much of that money, go ahead and check that out, and it'll be good. Hey, Cliff, howdy in Ontario, the Midnight Owl. I am glad. Jeff, Los Animas County, 0 cases. Again, we said in Colorado, what did we say, 3,000 cases? I think this is true in most of the United States on the coronavirus. I think that it is largely a few metropolitan areas that are the danger zones. If you happen to live, I don't know, let's say out in the mountains in Taos, New Mexico, then you are much more safe than if you live, obviously, in Manhattan. And so, here's this issue that somewhat, could I say, throws the numbers. We talked about this the other night. If you average Randy White's income with Bill Gates' income, if we are the two that are on there, then that becomes problematic. And because the answer, the average, is not anywhere what it should be. And so, can't really put all that together through all that. I see that, let's see, perhaps we're still having some problems on YouTube. I see not on YouTube, on Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, you might want to switch over to YouTube. Looks like we're not having those problems there. But we're glad you're here on the Theological Insomniac. We'll take your biblical theological worldview questions like we do on Ask the Theologian, but we'll also talk about the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal here tonight, and have a fun time doing it. Maybe you just are sitting at home and you're thinking, I am so tired of listening to Fox News. Well, it's probably time you turn it off. They've been repeating everything all day long. And let's have something else, something exciting here, like Pastor Ricky out in the left coast there from the state of Alcatraz. What's your opinion of the lost city of Atlantis? Any relationship to Genesis 6? Speaking of the paranormal, there is, let's just look up a random website here. Let's go. Here's one called Live Science. Is Live Science any good? I don't know. It looks like a real professional website. I mean, it must be by scientists here, isn't it? And it's from 2018. The idea of Atlantis, the lost island subcontinent, often idealized as an advanced utopian society holding wisdom that could bring world peace, has captivated dreamers, occultists, and New Agers for generations. Thousands of popular, let's see, thousands of popular books, magazines, you got it, about Atlantis. People have lost fortunes and in some cases even their lives looking for Atlantis. And that reminds me, let's look about Finn's treasure here sometime. The origins. The first story, 360 BC, but it looks like it was even prior to that. So you've got all of this Atlantis stuff, despite its clear origin. Many people over the centuries have claimed there must be some truth behind the myths. Okay, that's kind of what I suspected that we would hear. I think... Again, I haven't read all this or much of Atlantis, but I think that probably worldwide there will be these Atlantis myths, culture-wide, separated from various cultures. You would have these Atlantis myths. And so with that, then, we almost are forced to conclude there must be something behind these myths. Just like worldwide, of course, you have flood myths. Well, if you have flood myths worldwide, you have Atlantis myths worldwide. Can you put these together? Now, in, of course, Genesis 6, when you come, which is, again, the flood story, as most of you know, but it's late, you might have forgotten. When you come to Genesis 6, excuse me there, oops, got all the wrong buttons going there. Let's see if I can get you to the right place. There we go. All the magic we do here at night. So you've got here in Genesis 6, it came to pass that men began to multiply on the face of the earth. That was kind of like at the beginning. I guess if you take multiply, it's certainly early on, nonetheless. Daughters were born to them, the sons of God. I believe completely those are angels, the B'nai Elohim, saw the daughters of men that they were fair. They're fallen angels, by the way. And they took them wives, of which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Now, here's a mistake I think a lot of people do in reading Genesis 6. They ignore verses 1 and 2. And they say, well, verses 1 and 2 are kind of weird. But verse 3, my spirit will not always strive. Verse 4 is kind of weird. There were giants in the earth. So they want the flood story to say, I am mad at you. My spirit is not always going to strive. The wickedness of man is great. But they don't give the reason that God is mad. And that's in verses 1, 2, and 4. It has to do, the flood is completely tied to this issue right here of the sons of God and the daughters of men. And that's the reason why God says, my spirit shall not always strive. So I think then what you've got for Rick's question here is this lost city of Atlantis, any relationship to Genesis chapter 6? I think we could say there is, at least in the imagination of man, the collective imagination of man, it goes back to there used to be a civilization, advanced, giant, and that word giant, Nephilim, can mean giant in size, and I think that's exactly one of the meanings, at least, and certainly I think they were giant in size, but giant in power, giant in technology, giant in understanding. And so the collective memory of humanity, wherever you go, has said there was this unbelievable society. And this unbelievable society, now we call it Atlantis, it was lost. It was lost in water. And, then you sort of get away from the details, and they begin to take these things and say, well, now it was sunk. It was whatever the case may be in the issues that took place there. So, I think that there's a decent reason to make speculation that Atlantis is the human collective memory of the Nephilim and the Nephilim civilization prior to the flood. Now, can I prove that? No, I can't. So that moves it beyond scientific reasoning, which means it makes it paranormal, right? And that's what we do on these late nights, is we talk about the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal. Now, the paranormal, that is, it comes up beside normal, but it ain't quite normal. It is, para means to come alongside. So it comes up beside normal. It's not normal. What's the issue with it? I think here the issue that you've got in Atlantis is it will not go with scientific reasoning. That is not necessarily a reason that we need to reject it altogether. It also means we can't stake anything on it. We can't call that it's definitely true that Atlantis, we make all the case you can, and that's all the case you can make. And I think that is more what we've got now. I think that, again, somebody ought to do some further study on this and try to collect all the Atlantis lore. All I remember is back in the 70s, the man from Atlantis. Do you remember that? Who was that? Was it Bruce Baxter? Or was that the Incredible Hulk? I've forgotten. But one of those 70s shows, was it 70s or 80s? The man from Atlantis. Y'all are looking at me like I don't know what I'm talking about. It's because, you're too young. I don't know, but let's just check it out. Here we go. Man from Atlantis. How do I get there? There we are. I guess it's Patrick Duffy. Okay, I didn't realize it was Patrick Duffy. So what was the season? There was 77 through... the first season, I guess, was 1977. Was it only one season? How do I remember it if it was only one season? I don't know, but nonetheless, Patrick Duffy and the Man from Atlantis. Interesting show, interesting program. Yeah, I think it would be interesting for someone to come along and try to build the case that the collective human memory of Atlantis actually ties back to the Nephilim. It would be, I tell you, if somebody will write the good book, we'll put it on Trust House Publishers. I'm not going to put it on dispensational publishers, but we'll do it on Trust House Publishers, and put your name on it, and you're the one that has to deal with whether or not it's right or wrong. And we'll sell it cheap and put it on but have some biblical grounding for it. I mean, not just, it seems to me like. I mean, try to connect it at least and convince us. It's nothing wrong with thinking about that just a little bit through all of that. Atlantis, the Nephilim, there certainly is that collective memory of Atlantis. So I think that perhaps you've got something going there. Let me switch over here to YouTube and see. Oh, no, let me switch to my website here. How's that? Bob, kind of lonely in that room, aren't you? I mean, you people ought to be at randywhiteministries.org. Or .com. That's even better. That's the beta version. Bob's there all by himself. He says, I prefer the non-professional look. Thanks. That's kind of what we do here is on these, since I've been in the shed here, I can, it's just amazing how all this works. And I can, just magically appear in the studio. Welcome to Ask the Theologian. I'm Dr. Randy White. It's just amazing what can happen. I can be raptured. and leave the rest of you behind? But here, let me get back to our casual look right here. It's been kind of fun. As those of you who know, I've been here, we've got the shelter in place, and I'm trying to cooperate even though I have a bad attitude. So here I am. Minnesota, now under shelter in place edict also. Minnesota, is that Governor Gretchen? No, that's not sure who your governor is. Whitmire is what I'm trying to say, but I think maybe it is Minnesota. Or is that Michigan? I think that's Michigan. Evidently, no one is reading or understanding the sharing of Dr. Frank's charts. Yeah, I think this is right, especially among the politicians. This is why, by the way, I wrote that article earlier today. I hope some of you read it. And the article, once again, is this one. Dear politician with a graph, please read this. I hope all of you read it. If you haven't read it yet, just come down and read that, and then you ought to share it too. Here's the politician with a graph. That's just one of dozens of pictures you can find. Dallas County Judge Jay Jenkins, who has put a stay-at-home edict for Dallas County as well. Just go to Dispensational Publishing and blog, and then you'll find the Dear Politician with a Graph blog that I put. And so, yeah, in Dr. Douglas Frank's, we've been carrying these on Dispensational, in his projections, he has put Minnesota in as peaking maybe tomorrow, although I want to say, let me see if I can find this. Let's see. Okay, I'm not finding his most current. I'll have to look for the most current Minnesota. I want to say there was a big spike today, and that he's trying to determine whether or not he's going to have to change his model because of a couple of anomalies on it. So he's trying to figure that out. Now, I might be mixing that up with Michigan. In fact, I think I might be mixing that up with Michigan. Tim Walz. Yeah, I'm sure I'm getting Minnesota and Michigan mixed up. I guess, you all should not allow states in the same vicinity to start with the same letter. Can we pass a law about that or something? Yeah. Okay, Tim Walz, Minnesota's governor, he has been exposed and is exposed to I was reading that like before it was coronavirus. He's been exposed and is self-quarantining, so he wants the rest of us to join in. I don't know. And I don't know Dr. Frank's opinion on this either. If everybody goes back to work immediately, what does that do to his model? I don't know what he's factored in there on that particular issue. But, I have my doubts anyway on what is taking place there. In all of that. So let's see here. Okay, now I'm going to come back to YouTube on here. Let me find out where I left off. There we go. We've got a question from Stephen down in Florida. Was the synagogue as much a mystery as the church, since neither was mentioned in the Old Testament? Excellent. So you're right. There is no synagogue in the Old Testament. When we open up the New Testament, voila, here's the synagogue. Now, the church came together by mystery. That is the body of Christ. And even this Sunday, we were in Acts chapter 17 into 18. And Paul was in Athens and in Corinth. And even up to that point, all of the Messianic believers were meeting in the synagogue. So up to Acts 18, there was no church. Now, in Acts 18 is when Paul is going to leave. I believe we're going to be studying that this Sunday. Paul is going to leave the synagogue in Corinth. He's going to go next door to the house of Jason. Is it Jason or Justus? And he is there going to maybe establish a congregation. It's a little bit fuzzy on exactly what happens there, but he certainly leaves the synagogue then at that point. So maybe that's the earliest time we get this thing that we would call church, the word that we would use church. I know that in the scriptures you're going to find the word church there, but you always have to interpret that word to determine exactly what it means. So this mystery came, the mystery of the church as an organization, if we can use that, as a local congregation, that came along, or the local congregation came as a result of the mystery that was given to Paul. And therefore the church, the thing that we have now, or the body of Christ, came about. Now, this good question, was the synagogue as much a mystery as the church? I'm going to say not in the same way. And the reason I'm going to say not in the same way is because, as I've already mentioned, that the church was a result of the revelation to Paul. Now, that I'm aware of, there was no revelation that brought about the synagogue. Rather, the synagogue came by pragmatics. It was the practical thing to do to have the synagogue. Now, what do I mean by practical? Well, they had the destruction, of course, of the temple. You remember that. And with the destruction of the temple, they went to Babylon. They came back. They rebuilt the temple. During that time in Babylon and coming back, and the scattering that took place, and a lot of them never came back. Somewhere after the return, and probably after the book of Malachi, which would then, make it 400 years roughly before the time of the New Testament. So let's just say after the close of the New Testament, so many Jews scattered. They weren't together. They're coming together. They're saying, you know what? We don't have the... we're not together as a people. We need to do something. So out of pragmatics, the synagogue came together, and the synagogue was the word, I've forgotten what the word means. It's a gathering, a coming together. It's a very simple word, and so with that, then, the synagogue was pragmatics. A lot of pragmatics in the church today, a lot of things we do in the church today that are pragmatics, but I think the synagogue was pragmatics. The synagogue was not as a result of a mystery. So it was simply, the synagogue is a rabbinical invention. And I would not necessarily say a bad one. I mean, God has given us a brain and the ability to use it. And he did the rabbis back in the Old Testament the same way. I say that. There really were no rabbis. Rabbis were an invention of the synagogue. It was pragmatic. So maybe it's the Levites who are saying, and the Aaronic priesthood, they're saying, you know what? People don't come back from Babylon anymore. They don't come back for the, what would it be? For Passover or Pentecost. It's too far. They're not going to be here. They're not coming from Assyria. What are we going to do? And so maybe the Levites, we don't really know. I suppose if we looked at Chabad.org, maybe we could look at the origins of the synagogue. They might have some interesting articles on that. But with all that, then, the synagogue came, well, then the rabbis came, well, then the Chassan came, well, then the Pharisees and the Sadducees became political units with it. And so much of what we see when we open the New Testament that's never been mentioned before and yet comes without question, meaning it's old enough that they're not saying the synagogue, the thing that started last January, it's been around for so long that it's an accepted thing. Now, the reason I say that pragmatics is not wholly bad and that we do have a brain and that we should use it is that Jesus comes into the synagogue. Jesus never says a bad thing about the synagogue. He doesn't say a bad thing about the rabbi and some of the rabbinical systems. Now, he does often talk about rabbinical teaching when he says, you have heard it said. That's I think always, I was going to say 99% of the time, but I think 100% of the time, it really has to do with the rabbinical teaching is. So that pragmatic, let's start a little unit that gathers together and studies Torah. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. I don't think it was a result of mystery. Let's look here, origins of synagogue, and see if Chabad has anything with that particular search anyway. And round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. Here's some of the articles they've got here. None of them look directly related, however. We could probably do that search in a number of different ways and see what we could come up with, just to see what the Jewish interpretation of the origins of the synagogue are. Would be an interesting thing to do. Clint Stevens, Mount Vernon, good to see you. What's that, East Texas? I've heard of Mount Vernon, Texas, but I'm trying to remember where it is. Houston is shelter in place, I heard. Is it just Harris County, or is it the city of Houston? Which one is it? I'm not sure. I've heard that area was, of course, as you know, I came from that area. Yeah, in Mount Vernon, Clint says, befriended a family from California that moved to Texas a year ago, and he said he was glad they moved. Yeah, I think there's so many people moving out of California. We meet some of them here in New Mexico, though New Mexico is not one of the hot spots for it. But if you're in any of the states that border the Pacific states, it used to be that they would move to Oregon or Washington. Now Oregon and Washington are loons too, with apologies. So now they're moving to Idaho, Utah, Arizona, a little farther, Montana, maybe some Wyoming, but the wind blows in Wyoming. Definitely Colorado was a big, much of the growth of Colorado, going back probably to the 80s, came from California. Remember when Dr. James Dobson focused on the family? He moved from, was it Arvada or somewhere down there, California, and or Penelope, something like that, California, and he moved to Colorado Springs. And a lot of evangelical organizations centered right around in there. Conservatives kind of came because it kind of looked and felt like California a little bit. You could ski, you could have mountains, you could have fresh air and sunshine. New Mexico kind of always missed that. I'm not sure if it was the tax situation was not as bright or what it was. I think Albuquerque got some of it, but by and large, New Mexico missed it. But now they seem to be going more to Midwestern states. They just keep coming in, more to Midwestern states. Texas, I imagine, is the #1 California magnet right now. Now, one of the things, of course, California, I think is at a decline, but I don't know. Lots of people get born too, so it's hard to tell. But I think California is at a decline. But we also have to remember that it's always going to seem like a lot of Californians move in because there's 40 million of them. And when there are 40 million of something, they sort of get around. And this is what happens here in New Mexico. It seems like every other car is a Texas car. You know, so what are we, just overrun by Texans here? Well, it's because we've got 20 million neighbors next door. We only have, 2 million people here living here in New Mexico. And so the biggest non-New Mexico license plate is easily Texas. But it's really a matter of numbers. Nevada bans hydrochloroquine for Wuhan. Are they banning it because, this is Dan in Arizona, are they banning it because of the crazy guy that took like fish tank cleaner? I only read the headlines on that maybe has hydrochloroquine in it, but obviously has a lot of other stuff, or there was some deal that this guy thought he needed to take it, and somehow talk about this is why there's this, hashtag fake news, is because it goes to blame Trump, that somehow this is Trump's fault here. That's amazing. Clint, in Mount Vernon, Texas, the U.S. dollar is the world currency. Let's talk about that here. So in my opinion, that's why the debt is not that big of a deal. I always forget I can read it up there. But if the world went to another currency, we would be in a real bind. The ability to tax currency. Interesting. Going to what I said earlier on that particular book, you're right. And Great Britain went through this when the pound sterling, was the international currency, especially for buying oil. Now, let's talk about, I've got a link here. Let me find it. The move that we have seen just in the past few days, never let a crisis go to waste, right? This move to a cashless society. Let me pull up this article, which is probably a couple days old because I saved it a couple days ago. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. But that's a good one, too. 23,000 U.S. deaths from influenza. More children and 18 to 49-year-olds hospitalized than during the 2009 H1N1 pandemic. That's the one we used to call the swine flu until we decided that was racist for swine. Yeah, that's quite the article. 23,000 U.S. deaths. The United States is not going to probably, maybe if there's a second wave or something, but I doubt they're going to hit 5,000 deaths from coronavirus. Here's these 23,000 deaths that come from H1N1 or the flu, just the general flu. I saw another article as well, and I didn't totally understand it because it was written very scientifically, so it must be true. But it seemed to say there was a correlation between getting the flu shot and getting these respiratory diseases like coronavirus. The takeaway I got, which again might not be correct, but the takeaway I got was that coronavirus probably wouldn't be even as harmful as it is, except that the flu vaccines have lowered our ability to fight things like the coronavirus, which attack our lungs. Again, I may have the wrong take on that. Somebody ought to look into that and see what it is. What would be interesting, and somebody will probably do the study, I hope it doesn't get buried. Somebody probably will study and see, is there a correlation? After this is all over, let's look at who got it. And let's see how many of them got the flu shot. And let's see if there is a direct correlation. It might be, as I talked about earlier, there's just lots of Californians. And so it might be that there's just so many people that get the flu shot that you can't really scientifically separate that out. But if we are able to find that, 80 or 90 or 100% of people who got coronavirus, or probably what we should do is say who got hospitalized by the coronavirus, hospitalized or died from the coronavirus. How many of them had the flu shot? Or typically get flu shots. Let's see if there's some correlation there. There might not be, but that's what scientists do. They study these things and look to say, well, is it or isn't it? And if it is, they take it. If it's not, then they they don't do that, and we ought to study that. And I think we're still having a Facebook problem here. I am going to just write a note here. Some streaming problems on Facebook. You can come over to www.youtube.com/Randy White. There we go. Got that all done. I had my staff do that. Now, here's the article that I somehow got away from and I was listening to. 98% of the time I get back to where I wanted to do. But somebody follow that. Somebody just say, hey, I'm going to pick up on that. Is there a correlation between the flu vaccine and the coronavirus hospitalizations and deaths? Again, I don't know that we can find those numbers, but somebody ought to be watching that. Now, never let a crisis go to waste, right? Here's the article that came out. This is an old article, actually. I've sold, I've saved this old one, but I've heard talk about it the last 2 days. This article comes from last fall, November the 20th. Federal Reserve is looking into developing a digital currency in the U.S. Now, so that talk was back in November, the discussion of a digital currency. And now there's a lot of talk about it because, are there germs on that money? I kind of fear a society. I fear what this is going to do to our whole society. Are we going to be forever scared that we're not going to take a dollar bill anymore? How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you grew up drinking out of the garden hose? Well, my kids and I were talking about this the other day. We were talking about when they came out with water bottles. So, you go to the gas station, buy a water bottle. And we were talking, Shelley and I, about how when that came out, we thought how utterly ridiculous. Who's going to pay to drink out of a bottle of water? And Nathan or Whitney, one, I'm not sure, said, well, when you all went outside, what did you drink? I said, we drank out of the garden hose. Of course. What did you think we drank out of? And so we have a society today that, if little Johnny goes over there and picks up the hose and starts drinking it, I mean, Mama's gonna go into a conniption and stop. You can't drink out of that. And I kind of fear a society that's afraid of everything. Somebody told me as well, I think it was Corey today, told me that he told me by messenger, just in case, the Gestapo is listening. We were not in the same room. He told me that during the Blitzkrieg, is that the word for it? The bombings that took place in London, that Brits felt it their patriotic duty to go to work and to gather together in social gatherings and to have birthday parties and to go to church and to do all that. They just felt we've got to go on with life. Now, again, we've got, for better or for worse, we've got this society that doesn't want to take any risk. So here it comes. Here's my dollar bill. Oh, let me put on gloves. Oh, you got a dollar. Ooh. And I'm just not sure that's good for society in many ways. Maybe it's even not good for society in that I kind of think that we're supposed to take a few of those germs. Honestly, I can't prove this at all, but I think all of that hand sanitizer that everybody's using, I think that's a bad thing. I think that the body puts forth some oils that get rid of the things that you're not supposed to have. But if you constantly take all that off and you don't let the body learn how to do its work, I think it doesn't. It's so true in so many things. If you don't exercise a little bit, then those muscles they're not needed. So what do? They atrophy. They quit working, and they are not needed anymore. With that, excuse me, I just didn't want that left arm to atrophy. Oh, I can't get up. I think that we need a society that's willing to take a little bit of risk. Otherwise, we atrophy. Now, I'll get back here to the article here. The latest coronavirus pandemic has scared many in society from taking cash. So here's, again, this older article. The Fed is looking into developing a digital currency in the U.S. Let's just read some of the bullet points. U.S. central bankers have explored the possibility of developing a digital currency that would be directly available to businesses and households. We have assessed and we continue to carefully analyze the costs and benefits of pursuing such an initiative, the chairman said. In September, a couple of representatives said the central bank should consider a U.S.-backed cryptocurrency to remain competitive. That it was the issue about the U.S. dollar being the world currency that brought this up. We'll pick a random paragraph here. A digital currency backed by the central bank in the largest economy would be unprecedented and raise a host of legal and operational questions. Powell said it would be closely considered by policymakers, but added that the U.S. could be in some ways better positioned than other countries that have looked into such a proposal. Down further, we are concerned that the primacy of the U.S. dollars could be in long-term jeopardy from a wide adoption of digital fiat currencies. The lawmakers wrote an initial letter. This is the letter that was written by the lawmakers to Chairman Powell, adding that it may become increasingly imperative that the Federal Reserve take up the project of developing a U.S. dollar digital currency. You know, one of my fears with a digital currency, first of all, we have a digital economy. I sell some of y'all books, right? It's what I do. And I never see you and you never hand me $1. It's digitally done, right? And as a matter of fact, there are not that many paper dollars in existence in the world today. And for the most part, never have been. And we can digitally pass all these things around. But it's still based on cash, on the greenback. What we used to call it? There was another term for it, wasn't there? But we'll go with greenback. Still based upon that issue. Now, my fear with the digital currency, if we do away with coinage and paper money altogether, that the concern that brings to me is that they being Big Brother, the government, now can, and I presume will, because I never trust the government, will follow every cent that I spend or I receive or I give. They will know everything about me financially. If I do that, it's their money. The federal government owns it, so to speak. And they can do it now. You say, well, they can do that now. Well, not really, because I can go to the bank, pull out cash, and just distribute it around willy-nilly if I want to. I have the freedom and the opportunity to do that. I can stick it under the mattress, whatever it is. You can't do that with digital currency. And I think, it's, again, another one of these things that, to me, looks like it speaks to the issue of shall we say, Big Brother, if not one world government, and what comes through there. I appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Have you heard about the Chad Daybell cult that is making the news today? Did I pronounce it right? I have not heard about it. Let's see. Chad Daybell. Let's pull that up here. Doomsday writer Chad Daybell claimed to have visions. Well, let's just pull this up. Who knows what website this is? Chad Daybell, 5 fast facts you need to know. Okay, let's just look at the, here's the fast facts. Police say Vallow and Daybell are wanted for questioning the disappearance of Vallow's children. Okay, so lengthy article. Tammy Daybell's death was initially deemed natural, but her body was exhumed, and Chad married Lori a couple weeks later. Okay. Written more than 25 books, owns a publishing company devoted to LDS values. That's Latter-day Saints. Watch out for those guys who own publishing companies. Number 4, Daybell is a graduate of Brigham Young who once worked in a cemetery. Chad and Tammy Daybell met while they were both in college. Well, that's an interesting 5 facts. I'm not sure why we need to know that. I'm going to have to get into that a little more. But is it that... let's read this first paragraph. Chad Daybell is author of Latter-day Saints-oriented books who is being sought by police for questioning in the disappearance of his new wife's children. Compounding the urgency, authorities are also investigating the death of Daybell's previous wife, Tammy, a well-known librarian, well-liked librarian in Idaho. Okay, so is there, let's see, under arrest by Kauai police? Okay, maybe Lynn knows a little bit about this. Is there some kind of a Mormon offshoot cult that is centering around this fugitive? As you can tell, I don't always listen to the news all that much, and so I kind of missed that one. Interesting. Rick has a question here. Where'd you go, Rick? There you are. What is Dr. White's current dispensational position? Acts 2, Acts 8, etc. What was the convincing point for you to settle on your position? You know, as you speak, of course, of dispensational position, I am sure you mean when did the church begin? Let me say, first of all, can I word it a little different? Because I'm assuming you mean when did the church begin? I am going to say, when did the dispensation begin? I think you could argue that some group of people began in Acts chapter 2, and that group of people later intermingled with the people that Paul was with. In fact, it was Paul, let me go this way, Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, and Barnabas from the church in Jerusalem. Then it was Paul, apostle to the Gentiles, and Silas, representative from the church of Jerusalem. Paul and Barnabas going together, Paul and Silas going together. So these two things were kind of going hand in hand, a very different purpose and function that they're carrying out, and even gospel, I might say, and those they're witnessing to. But I'm a little uncomfortable saying the church did not start in Acts chapter 2, though I would say the church as we know it did not start in Acts chapter 2. I would say everything that started in Acts chapter 2 was wholly, W-H-O-L-L-Y, Jewish. and therefore it was not neither Jew nor Greek. This was a continuation of the synagogue. It was a continuation of the Jewish way of life, and they were doing that for 10 years after that. When Paul's finally at the home of Simon the Tanner, remember, they're still doing these very Jewish things and haven't gone to the remotest parts of the earth yet. And not out of disobedience, just out of the fact that they hadn't accomplished what they were assigned in their so-called Great Commission to accomplish, beginning at Jerusalem. So, but then they so intermingle with Saul. In fact, it's my position that Saul of Tarsus, after he becomes a believer, he's still Saul of Tarsus, that he walked with them, he fellowshiped with them, he ministered to them, and he even proclaimed with them. As a matter of fact, I think that it was Saul of Tarsus on what we often call Paul's first missionary journey. But that was Saul's first missionary journey, if you will. And I think he went out there completely with a Jewish message, this message to the Jews about Jesus as Messiah. Now, during his so-called second missionary journey, that's when he received the mystery, and that's when tensions, if you could bring it, if that's the correct word, tensions begin to come, and it separates out the kingdom gospel that Saul had been involved in and the grace gospel that Paul now had been given. Now, I think that the first time that grace gospel is voiced is Acts chapter 13, verses 38 and 39. That's where Paul says, now you can be justified from things from which you could not be justified under the law of Moses. In fact, he says, now all men, everybody can be justified without the law of Moses, separate from the law of Moses. Now, that's Acts chapter 13. And so I think from chapter 13 onward, then you have a mixture of Paul and Silas. Paul, and I was going to say Barnabas, but Barnabas actually doesn't come after chapter 13. So you've got Paul and Silas from chapter 14 onward, anyway, that are carrying out the Jewish work. James of the Jewish crowd, obviously, that takes place then in Acts chapter 15, at least. So if I may, let me make your question say, what's your dispensational position on the beginning of the dispensation? I would begin it when Saul's name changes to Paul. Follow that in the book of Acts. When he is no longer Saul, but now he is Paul, that is indication of the new dispensation. Now, with that, however, some would say, well, that makes you mid-Acts. However, we've got some like Joel here who are my mid-Acts friends, Brian Ross, and others, David Reed, that, you know, are very good friends and companions in ministry. And yet with that also, they would differ from where I am in some things like water baptism. I would allow water baptism. They would not allow water baptism. And so that puts me a little more on the Acts 2 side, or the normative dispensational side. So basically, I don't have any friends. I'm a man without a country. You know, just reminds me, now it's intentional. It didn't necessarily come out that way, but I don't closely align with any of the big kind of, I'll say, clearinghouse ministries. And one of the reasons I don't is because I realize that I'm just a little bit too unique, that eventually someone's going to say, you know, we get too many letters about you. So my dispensational position is I'm Randy White. My dispensational position is Randy White is a theologian scientist. How's that? Meaning that I am going to change my position if I come to be convinced that my position doesn't align with Scripture. I think I mentioned this earlier in the week, but this last Sunday was a good example of that, in which the previous Sunday I did not finish my Acts study, and that is presentation of the study. I didn't finish the outline, so I just stopped right there. I came back to it last Sunday, and I had to amend. The part that I didn't get to, I had to amend. I had to write on the outline, if you got session, I think it's 56, ignore 56, go with 57. And because I just couldn't bring myself by the next week to say what I was saying aligned with Scripture and with my overall position. So I changed. I think, I hope that all of us are there to some degree, that we are willing to say, okay, give me a textual argument and I'll go there. So I'm a little bit my own person on that dispensation, but I think the dispensation started with Paul when his name changed. I think that's the mark that you can give. Some mid-Acts disagree with me because they're very strongly Acts 9, and his name's not changed till the 13th chapter. And I don't base it upon his name being changed, by the way, but I think his name change just is so stark right there with that we've got to notice that it's Paul from here on out, and that comes in that same time period. So now, what was the convincing point to settle you on your position? My growth in dispensationalism started, I believe I've said a number of times, with the issue of the tithe, actually, when I began to contemplate, is a believer obligated to the Old Testament tithe? Because I was a Baptist preacher. You know how this works, Rick. I had to preach the tithe. It was like, number 2 on the job qualifications. You must preach tithing. I stretched just a little bit, but not much. So the tithing thing actually is what got me to be a dispensationalist, because I just began to study the contradictions that were there, and I said, I've got to do something. And so I went, I became a dispensationalist with the tithing issue. Well, then it's hard telling what brought me. I think it was the fact that I recognized then, with that got me into dispensationalism, I recognized that there, in the first part of Acts, they were doing law. And they were meeting at the temple, which means they had to have been doing law. And here I had come to the conclusion that we were free from the law, and I was reading that they were doing the law. And I thought, how does this align? And I finally decided it doesn't align. The only way to bring harmony to that is to bring a separation. Now, when I did that, then I had to decide, okay, how does James fit in here? And I realized, it's not a problem. We put James prior to Paul. James is in Sauline theology, not Pauline theology. And I worked through all that slowly. In 2014, I preached the book of Acts for the first time, or I should say I taught the book of Acts. It was a Wednesday night study in First Baptist Church in Katy. And that was eye-opening for me. And I did it. I think in that particular series, there were 40 sermons in the series, or studies in the series, all the way through Acts. This time I started in 2019 now, and I am on session number, I think this Sunday will be 58. And I'm only to the 18th chapter, so I'm going through it much more detailed than I did last time. And some of you are painfully aware of that. But I think it was that issue of why are they obeying the law? Doesn't work. Okay, dispensational change fixes it, and so that's where I aligned. good discussion tonight there on that. Thank you. Okay, sorry, it took me a while to get there. Mount Vernon in East Texas. I knew I haven't spent much time in East Texas. I mentioned the other day the churches I'd served in. Kaufman, Texas is the closest I got. That's, sort of east of Dallas, so it's considered East Texas, kind of. But I knew it was over there. You're like deep in East Texas, right? Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. He says, great info, my brother. Enjoyed and edified. I appreciate that. That's not, we should shake hands. Oh, excuse me. It's against the law. Okay. Down in Houston area, Harris County and Fort Bend County. So that would be the majority of the Houston area and southeast of Houston. That would include most of Katy, Texas, not all of it, but it's a big chunk there. A lot of millions of people in Harris and Fort Bend County there. Okay. Back to the what was it called in Nevada that they're hydrochloroquine banned because of hoarding. That's interesting. I don't understand hoarding other than, I heard a comment today. Let me find it here. I wrote it down. I was listening to the radio. I was actually driving. I drove to the grocery store. That's the only place I went. And was listening to Fox Business, and somebody on Fox Business was interviewing somebody else. That's all they do. And they were interviewing a grocery store high up executive, not CEO, but, up there. And this executive was talking about how, we're going to be okay. She went on, we don't have a supply problem. We don't have a supply problem. And I thought, okay, that's good. She told me we're going to have food. This goes to the hoarding issue. We don't have a supply problem. Then she said, and this is what I wrote down. She said, we don't have a supply problem. We have a demand problem. Well, I thought, lady, did you hear what that? We don't have a supply problem. We have a demand problem. That is to say, if you people didn't want it, then we would have plenty of it. Quit buying our stuff. So don't worry. There's no supply problem. It's only a demand problem. But there are some hoarders. I don't know that it's the average person. But I think that one of the things our government leaders ought to understand, and if they don't, they're dumb as a box of rocks, distinct possibility, that when you tell people we might have to close down everything for 3 months, what are they going to do? They're immediately going to go to the store, and they're going to buy everything that they can buy. It's not really hoarding. It is being responsible to take care of your family. Now, hydrochloroquine, I don't know how to say that. If there are, and you run across sometimes that, say, I can make some money here. We make that illegal, and there's criminal penalties against it. We ought to just teach better morality, take care of your neighbor. And I don't know that that's going to happen, so we probably just have to make it illegal. Stephen has a question in 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 16. Let me get there first, and I'll read the question. 1 Chronicles. I always use the wrong keyboard when I'm in this studio here. 1 Chronicles 15, 16. Still didn't get there. 1 Chronicles 15, 16. There we go. How could David, out of the blue, Just think of having singers for God without consulting God first to see if it was okay to do. And why did God let him? Even though Jesus sang a hymn with the apostles at one of the last meals before going to the cross, also recall the problems with David wanting to build a temple and census without God's okay. Even before I read it, by the way, I think of Aaron's two children, forgot their names, pretty common, well-known names that'll come to me in a moment. And they had that strange fire on the altar, remember, and they died. So let's take a look at First Chronicles, 15:16. David spoke to the chief of the Levites to appoint their brethren to be singers with instruments, music, that's in the old English spelling, psalteries, harps, cymbals, sounding by lifting up the voice of joy. So the Levites appointed these particular men. Let's see if Bollinger gives us a reference on this. First Chronicles, see if I can spell that there. First Chronicles 15:16. Those of you who use Logos, did you know you can use a period instead of a colon, which sometimes speeds things up just a little bit? Okay, there's nothing there of interest to this particular question anyway. So how could he just bring out singers out of the blue? What I would, first of all, I'm going to question the out of the blue part. Music in the Bible goes back to what? Jubal? Jubal Cain. We get jubilation from it. Jubal was often considered the inventor of music, but as I remember, Jubal was not necessarily a good guy, right? Let's find Jubal. Genesis chapter 4, verse 21, but I want to back up a little bit. Maybe so. Okay, here we go. Enoch, is this the Enoch? Yes, this is the Enoch that walked with God. Unto Enoch was born Arad. Arad begat Mehujael. Mehujael begat Methusael. Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him two wives. The name of one was Ada. The name of the other Zillah. Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such that dwell in tents and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. Again, this is where we get the word jubilation, or I don't think jubilee comes from this, but let's see if we've got a meaning in Strong's. Just means stream, okay. I believe you do see this name in Israel from time to time. It's usually Yuval. Yuval is the way they would say it in Israel. Now, then that's only incidental to this matter. Then the question becomes, do we have, from that point, is there any expression of music that is received of God, God honoring? You know, I've never studied this before. I think Roger Bays is on earlier. I don't know if he's still on. Roger, if you're still on, he's our resident musician. And Roger, if you're still on, let me see here if I can come. Okay. I don't see Roger on, but maybe he is. Roger, where did music begin in the Bible? I know Jubal, but where is there any place where's the first time we see music sung and God being pleased by it? Or in the instructions of the tabernacle, of course, there's not at that point, I think in Exodus, let's speculate here. Or let's ask a question. In the Exodus and the instructions of the tabernacle, or in Leviticus, perhaps with the instructions for the priest, is there any indication of music that is taken or required there? Let's look just quickly at the treasury of Scripture knowledge. And again, let's look up 1 Chronicles 15:16, and I'll bring that up in the middle of the screen here. And I'm just looking briefly for any early scriptures. Ezra and Nehemiah is the first thing I see. Psalms, Isaiah would have come before the destruction of before the fall of Israel, but after the division of the monarchy, so that's pretty late, and I don't see anything there that is of relation to the music part of it. So I'm going to tentatively accept your assumption here out of the blue. Out of the blue, singers would be a good idea. Now, let's relate that to the sons of Aaron who brought a strange fire and died. I think the difference here is that as they bring the strange fire, they are actually changing the way in which a sacrifice was given unto God. At that point, the fire came from heaven. They were not supposed to bring that. So they were doing an act of God, if you will. David, on the other hand, is maybe adding to the environment, but he's changing nothing in the temple. He's got singers around, but it would be the tabernacle here. In David's day, we do see David singing and dancing before the Lord. I don't know if that's chronologically after this point or before this point, but this appears to go back to what we were talking about earlier when the synagogue, when we talked about pragmatics. Maybe you could argue, again, this would be a very worthy study sometime, music, the rise of music in the worship of God. Maybe you could argue that this seemed to be a pragmatic thing to God, and it was carried out. It was begun. I like your question. I don't have the answer to it. He did somewhat do it out of the blue. God didn't punish him for it. And the Levites also, he spake to the chief Levites to appoint their brethren. I suppose the Levites could have gone against him and said, no, this is not right. And the Levites were the representative of God, in a sense, as the priestly people. They didn't do it. Maybe they consulted with God. He said it was okay. Maybe maybe it wasn't out of the blue, but it sure looks out of the blue there. Interesting. Stephen has a good question, talking about the earlier we were talking about the flu shot and any connection, and he's got a possibly something good, but I'm not sure. He says, how many in China, Italy, Spain had the flu shot? Come on, man. And how many peasants in Wuhan had the flu shot? The thing that I'm not sure that I don't think they had the flu shot. And one of the reasons is that those countries have such strong governmentally controlled healthcare systems that that it may be required. It's probably an easy Google search, but I just did a Google search because you said how many peasants in Wuhan had the flu shot. The word peasants in Wuhan didn't really go together, so I pulled up these pictures of Wuhan here, and let's just you know, we don't have to go through too many of these to say it doesn't really look like a peasant city. Now, just because they have skyscrapers and all this, I suppose doesn't mean they have a lot of money, but it certainly looks like, you know, an advanced modern civilization in Wuhan. I wonder what that building there is. Looks like a church. Let's see here if we can, see if we can go and see what that building is. Well, there's a whole bunch of things we would have to go through to find that. I was, yeah, there's a panorama in 2017. Yeah, I'm sure you could look on there. Religion, they've got 0.3% Catholicism. I bet that was a Buddhist temple. Oh, there's the Holy Family Catholic Church. Ah, here's this one I'm looking for. It's a railway station. How's that? Just looked like a church. Constructed 1900 to 1903, closed in 1991 after the opening of a certain rail station that was there. So I'm still not convinced, Stephen. But someone Google it. If see, you know, do Chinese get the flu shot? I don't know. But nonetheless, you do bring up a good point that we can't just study it in the U.S. Because obviously China, Italy, Spain are countries that have it worse than we do. Iran, for that matter. So do they bring about that? Stephen, this is why you're a good man, because you used to drink from any moving stream. Yeah, we didn't worry about all those things before, did we? Dima, going to hand washing earlier, I was talking about infectious control. This is the problem with this. You comment, and then I comment later. I get so behind on all of that. Sorry. Infectious control doctor told me to use hand sanitizer only when soap and water are not available. Yeah, they're kind of saying that today, but I've never liked the antibiotic hand sanitizer. My family uses it, honestly, and I always make fun of them when they use it. And they use it when they go into a restaurant and they, you know, smother it all over, and it's usually like lavender smell or something. And my opinion, health matters aside, is like that whole nose thing messes with my hamburger. I don't want that right up there. So no, I got a sleeve. I mean, you don't need that. Hi, Dima. The pivot point. Yeah, you were with us in those Acts messages, weren't you? We appreciate Dima. Mount Vernon, between Texarkana and Dallas on I-30. Okay. Isn't that where, where's the place that Keith Green, the musician, was from? Is that right in there, in that area there? Stephen, thank you. I really like your teaching, even the stuff I don't understand or agree with. What? There's something you don't agree with? You gotta be crazy. Thank you, Dan. Jubal was the son of Cain. I had that in my mind, and when I was reading there, and what got me confused is there's I think 2 Enochs and 2 Lamechs. There's good and there's bad. And I should have picked that up because Lamech's father was Noah. And so that's the Cain side. So it is on the bad side. So is music bad? I don't know. We'll check that there. Another good point by Dan. David didn't even know how to move the ark. Yeah, either didn't know or totally ignored it. But let's go with didn't know. Nabal. It's you're close, Stephen. Abijah, Nahal. That's what it is, isn't it? Nahal and Abijah. Aaron's sons is what we're talking about. Roger is here. Okay, earliest music is hinted in the poetry of Genesis. Needs to be studied. Okay, you're right. The poetry of Genesis, or there is poetry in Genesis. Genesis 49 is almost entirely a poem. I'm sure you could find others in Genesis. Of course, this is later than Genesis, but you've got the Song of Moses, and the singing that goes along with that. So that's a good point, that if you take the Song of Moses, which is Deuteronomy chapter 32. Let's find that and see. Okay, that's what I suspected. Is Deuteronomy 32 does not actually speak of it as a song, but it's clearly Hebrew poetry, and you can see that just by the way that it's written in most English Bibles. You notice the previous section here is in block text, and then when you get into the poetry, and you can tell it's poetry in Hebrew by reading it. And so we call it the Song of Moses there, as assuming that it is a song, but actually it could be the poem of Moses. I was trying to come to the end and see. Yeah, okay, it does say song here. Moses came and spake all the words of this song. Let's just double check to make sure that we're going to do a very simple check here, but I think it'll tell us. Song, music, singing, musical. Okay, so it seems to be, very musical word there. So it does call that a song then. So, got some of that there. Very, very good. But I think I agree. We ought to study that just a little bit on when music was used in worship. So it looks like, going back to Moses here, that music being acceptable to God and received of God and an appropriate way of worship, maybe by the time of David had a long-standing tradition. What would be equally interesting to look there is to see not only does God implicitly accept it, but is there a place where he explicitly accepts it or explicitly commands it? And of course, you've got the entire book of Psalms, which almost certainly relate to music. And in fact, it even talks in some of the titles about the harpist and to the chief musician and some of these things that are given in there. Now, obviously, that's in the days or after the days of David. So Lindale, that's what I was speaking about for the musician that died in the plane crash. Keith Green is what I was trying to say back, what was that, 80s? Don Meredith's from Mount Vernon, too. I didn't know that. Nadab, that's it. Nadab and Abihu. I knew we were close. The sons of Aaron, yeah. Thank you. Hey, I tell you what, let's look. I need to jump over to Facebook, first of all. Let me make sure I haven't neglected you all on Facebook or on my website here. And Joel, doesn't Acts 26:16 clearly address two aspects of Saul's ministry? Let's pull up the scripture there. Again, if you're still awake, Joel, let's see. Acts... wrong keyboard. Acts 26:16 says, "But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things which I will appear unto thee." It does tell us there, and this is Paul reciting his Damascus Road experience. Let me read one more verse before I continue. Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles unto whom I now send thee. Our friend Joel is still with us. What are you doing up so late, Joel? Now, I think that we see here, let's see, we see a foreshadow for this, let's see, arise, stand on thy feet. I've appeared to thee to make you a minister and witness both of these things which thou hast seen. Now, I think that right here, this is a good point. I think I'm tracking with you here. This blue point right here, to make thee a minister and witness of these things which thou hast seen. That has to be the kingdom gospel, the things that Peter had been preaching and proclaiming, because that's the only things which he could have seen. So he is going to be a witness both of these things which thou hast seen and of those things in which I will appear unto thee. Now remember, at this point, he does not know what those things are. All that the Lord says there at that point is, I am going to tell you something else. So, to Joel's question / comment here, doesn't Acts 26:16 clearly address two aspects of Paul's ministry? Excellent point. I think it did, and I'm glad you brought that up to me, because when I get to Acts chapter 26, of course I'm in Acts chapter 18 now, I want to bring that about, and that goes back then. If you were to chart this, and all dispensationalists love charts, and mid-Acts are best at charts. So if you were to chart this, then I would take Acts 1 through 13 as 13, 36, 37. Prior to that, or the place in 13 where Saul is mentioned, Saul is Paul. We'll go with that verse. Let's just look that up so I give you an exact number here. Acts 13. If you're staying up this late, you just will get something exact, right? And we have in Acts 13, verse 9, where it says then that Saul, who is also called Paul. Now, prior to that, he's called Saul. After that, he's called Paul. The only time we're going to see him called Saul again is when we have flashbacks to time prior to this. So if you wanted to make your chart or divide the book of Acts and say Acts 1 through 13:8, that would be, to back up again to this Acts 26, that would be where Paul is a witness of the things which thou hast seen. Now, you couldn't actually do it that way, because Saul, of course, doesn't even appear. I said Paul a minute ago. I should have said Saul. Saul doesn't even appear until chapter 8. So you would have to do a 1 through 8-ish as Peter's ministry. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are going to be back and forth between Saul and Peter, but that would be Saul being a witness of the things which you have seen. And then 13, verse 9 and onward, where he becomes Paul, that then is going to be, and of those things in which I shall appear to you. And Joel says, I'll send you my chart, or did I? And if you did, send it again. I don't think you did, but send that again, Joel. I appreciate it. Bible Doctrines to Live by the way, is Joel's ministry up in Grand Rapids. And we're looking forward to doing some partnering on some literature they've got, too, that I think you'll be excited to see there. Thanks for that comment. Glad I switched over to that. Now let me check you guys on Facebook here and see who we've got here on Facebook, and Joel had one on there previously before switching over, probably. Snowflakes are scared of fill in the blank. Drinking from the water hose. Although I see we've got a nurse on board. Jeremy, you ought to give us some word here about whether a person should drink out of a water hose. An East Texas skilled nurse. That's not. You can't. I don't know what that word means anymore. I mean skilled. What I mean to say is like highly educated, teaching kind of nurse. Tell us if you should drink out of a fire hose, Jeremy. What do you think? And should you drink out of a running stream like Steve did and live to tell about it? Just make sure you're always up here in the mountains where I am before you drink out of a running stream. Snowflakes are scared of dispensationalists. Snowflakes are scared of yelling. Makes them cry. All sorts of things. I might show you a newspaper article here in a minute. I'm running long before I even get to stuff I had online here. But let's see. Tammy says, I was drawing and I saw you here, but about to go to bed about midnight. But don't go to work till 2 p.m. Well, Tammy, glad you stopped by. I appreciate that. And got a number of others on YouTube, Facebook, who have joined us in and out, and appreciate all of that. Always good to see you folks who are with us here. So there is, I want to show you a newspaper article clipping. Let me find it here. Let's see, where are we? And that's not it. And maybe this is it. Yeah, here we go. I found this to be interesting. Let me pull up the newspaper here, first of all. And many of you know I've been searching old newspapers for dispensational material. And I found some very interesting stuff. Here is one, a magazine called The Christian Companion. It's September 22nd, 1910. Now, I looked it up. I want to say they published from about 1907 to 1913 or so. So it wasn't long-lived, but a few years back there. I tried to find out, and I didn't read enough articles in the Christian Companion to tell, but there was a few things that made me think that maybe it was Church of Christ, at least ideology. But nonetheless, found this interesting article on page 3 of the Christian Companion, and the article is on the open door, the book of Revelation. J.M. Barrie, I should look up his name, see if there's anything else on him. He writes about the 7 spirits of God. Now, I kind of skipped this in our latest series on Revelation that I'm doing right now. In fact, I just preached on the open door on Sunday. I skipped it chiefly because I'm going through the book quicker in a preaching series than I am in a verse by verse. But I've always kind of wondered about these 7 spirits of God. Why are there yeah, obviously, you can say some spiritual things, and somewhat accurate about 7 being the number of spiritual completion, and so is this totality of the Spirit of God. But it is curious to me that the Scripture on a number of occasions mentions the 7 spirits of God, the 7 spirits which are before his throne. So anyway, when I found this article, I was just looking for dispensational issues. That's why dispensational is highlighted here. And you have this passage right in here from the 7 spirits which are before his throne. Now, this writer, J.M. Barrie, goes on in this fairly brief article to have something interesting that I hadn't seen before. Maybe some of you have. But it speaks about these 7 spirits, he says, which is equal to the 7 dispensational ages. Hence, the form of the expression 7 spirits of God, each distinctive age, on account of its peculiar character and degree of development, required a special dispensation of the Word and the Spirit. Now, maybe we'll pick up on here. I'm not sure that Church of Christ, the Campbellites, held to enough dispensationalism that they would have this distinction. They certainly didn't rightly divide the book of Acts, we could at least say. But it's an interesting concept. Could the seven spirits somehow be indicative of the sevenfold Spirit of God, as he says here? We won't read the entire article, but let me get back up to the top of this column here. He goes on to say, manifested, these sevenfold spirits of the word, manifested distinctively to seven dispensational ages of generation and regeneration, and respectively extending from man's creation to the achievement of his ultimate goal. It's a pretty decent explanation of what dispensationalism is. It might not be considered amiss in this connection to render the scriptural definition of age or ages. And basically he says an age, he goes through some Greek here, that the ages are the seven dispensational epochs of the present cycle, as well as to that of creation. Now, he goes on further in the article to say the dispensational ages of the Spirit are those of inspired history and prophecy, by which should be determined the measure of each. This may be accomplished approximately, at least, by finding the beginning and the end of each respective age. Again, it's decent dispensational theology that was given in this 1910 newspaper article. He talks about one dispensational age may vary from the length of another. An age might be limited by only a few brief years, while its successor might extend over centuries, even thousands of years. Now, he mentions of these dispensational ages, 5 have come and passed at the time of the inauguration of the Christian era, each of which are approximately defined by the beginning, the progress, and the ending. He describes some of that. Now, here's how he enumerates them. This is a little bit different than normally we would go. They may be enumerated as follows. The Edenic, that is the time in which they were in the Garden of Eden. The antediluvian. Now, here we basically agree. We would call it typically the age of innocence, the age of conscience, but antediluvian, that means before the flood, before the deluge. The post-diluvian, that one's not terribly well named, but all dispensationalists that I know do put a division at the flood. After the flood, we would call it the age of government. Then he calls it the Egyptian. I'd like to know more about it, and I probably will look at more, because he has says there's a series here, and I've only read this one article out of the series. The Egyptian dispensation. Is he talking about the time in Egypt, or is he talking about from the time of Abraham through the time of Moses? I'd like to know what he means there. He might actually mean that entire 430-year period from Abraham to the giving of the law. And then the Mosaic, we would call that the age of the law. These 5, in addition to their historical value, are written mainly in types and shadows. The 2 remaining dispensations are the dispensation of faith and the dispensation of knowledge. Now, we would talk about the dispensation of grace and the dispensation of kingdom. He uses faith and knowledge, spelled a little bit differently, but a man who can only think of one way to spell a word has an awfully small imagination. It's an interesting earlier viewpoint of dispensations. He says, oops, wrong button there. See if I can get myself back where I belong here. There we go. In the next lesson, I shall endeavor to delineate some of the features and conditions by which the 7 dispensations may be distinguished from each other. So we'll check that out. But have any of you, dispensational teachers perhaps, have any of you heard of the 7 spirits being connected to these 7 dispensations. Interesting stuff that we find there in, again, the Christian Companion in 1910. Just incidentally, while we're here, that was on page 3. On page 4, they have the temperance department. Whiskey, tobacco, and missions. Now this one we need to take a look at. Below, we submit an article by Brother McCaleb published in the Leader Way of August 30th. I'm glad Brother McCaleb is waging a relentless war on tobacco everywhere he goes. The editor speaking here, he says, if all preachers would do that, but how can they when some of them use the nasty stuff? Get ashamed of it, brethren, and quit it. But here's the article. I think I might not agree with this guy on everything, but I think I like him because he talks kind of like I do. How can you do it when you do that nasty stuff? Get ashamed and quit it. Now back to our article. And here's the article. It's good, too. The article says, now this is now Brother McCaleb speaking. One brother the other day defended his pipe on the ground that it could be contented. I don't know what he means. I said, that won't do, brother. The book says godliness with contentment is great gain, but you say it's tobacco and contentment. I think he probably said, you say it's tobacco and contentment. You've chosen too low a companion. That's just it. You see professed Christians settle down in their sins and burn up and chew up and spit out their $25 a year, which is virtually chewing up and spitting out the souls of men, as well as imperiling their own, and then plead poverty when it comes to missions. Oops, I blacked you out, didn't I? There. I just can't get all those buttons right. I still don't have them right there. Here's where we're going. Sorry about that. Now, look at this sentence right here. This is actually pretty colorful, that you burn up and chew up and spit out $25 a year. That's a nice way of putting all of the tobacco use there. And he says that's virtually chewing up and spitting out the souls of men. And now, what he says is, you do all this and then plead poverty when it comes to missions. I think what he's saying is that $25 should be spent on missions, not spit in tobacco. Let's go on with the article. He says, I spoke in one of the churches a few nights ago where the young men just before preaching stood right up in the house and puffed their cigarettes, where the church members all through the service, both men and women, sat in the amen quarters and squirted their tobacco juice around on the floor. I called their attention to it publicly and suggested they were spending probably not less than $500 a year for tobacco alone, enough to support a missionary. One of them told me afterwards that the amount sold at that place would probably reach $1,000 instead of $500. But they allowed the missionary to come and go at his own expense and never offered him a cent. And 2, I find that the whiskey curse in churches is not dead. Not yet dead. For one pretense or another, members of the church are still taking their dram in secret. To show you that I don't drink whiskey, I suppose a dram is a measure of whiskey. And the church members are still taking their dram in secret. In many instances, almost an open secret at that. I had been in the house of a certain brother down in Florida. A few minutes, I had only been in the house of a certain brother down in Florida a few minutes, till on entering the room, Sister P reached around and drew a round quart bottle about a third full, and in all apparent innocence asked, "Will you have a dram?" A dram of what? I asked, for I thought this must be a joke in it somewhere. She assured me it was no sham by saying, well, it's corn whiskey. Give us what the churches are spending for tobacco and drink alone, and we'll have an abundance to support every missionary in the foreign field who is willing to go and be all the better prepared to do it more at home. Neither is it correct to assume that the increase in the home field is great over in the foreign field. Well, then he goes into church planting. We'll read that later. Anyway, I thought that was a kind of a fun article that goes there. Yeah, this clearly is not a Baptist group, because here's page 5. This is the last I'll do of this article. Page 5 is J.W. McGanney. From Exegetical Notes. He says, let's see, Brother Williams tells us of a brother who thinks that when we cannot get wine for the Lord's Supper, water will do as a substitute, and wishes to know what we think about it. We think that when the Lord tells us to use wine, wine is the thing which he wishes us to use, and that if we substitute anything else, we are disobedient. I thought that was interesting after the page about the whole, corn whiskey deal. But I guess, to his credit, the Lord doesn't tell us to use corn whiskey. And listen, if you are spending $25 a year smoking it, chewing it, and spitting it out, let me encourage you to go to randywhiteministries.org and click the donate button. You could support a missionary if you would take care of that. Always fun with those articles. Joel says, at first thought, Joel, I'm going to ask you a question, just because we happen to be on that. And I don't know the answer, honestly. It's not an agenda-driven question. It really is an information-driven question. I come from a Baptist background. And Baptists, when we do the Lord's Supper, we do not use wine. We use grape juice. Baptists have tended to be teetotalers. In the temperance movement, the Baptists often led it and preached sermons somewhat like that. And so I was a little surprised when I turned over and saw that this is a wine drinking church. In mid-Acts churches, I know some don't even take the Lord's Supper. Those who typically take it, do they use wine or do they use grape juice? Curiosity. Some of the rest of you, if you come from, I don't know, we got any Mennonite brethren out there, or what do we got out there? Tell us, are you a wine or a grape juice person when it comes to the Lord's Supper? Or can you substitute water? That's the question. But let me get to Joel's question or comment here first. At first thought, who declared there are 7 dispensations? Back to this article of the 7 spirits and the 7 dispensations. I agree with you already, and I haven't read the whole sentence. Scofield popularized 7 in his Bible, but I have figures of 2 to 20 plus. I personally do not prescribe to the 7. Now, I really kind of agree with you. I think that this might be a case of, this is 1910. Scofield's Bible came out in 1907. Was this man influenced by Scofield, or was that a popular teaching in the day? It's hard to tell which came first here, but I did think that, as I was thinking that also is that sort of backfilling the scripture, if you will, interpreting the scripture by what Scofield said, which is not the way to interpret scripture. I suppose 7 has been the most popular number, but even at that, I'm working on a book on understanding dispensations, and I end up with 8. Some of these you can kind of divide out a number of different ways to end up with, I don't know if you could come less than, maybe you could come less than 7 if you took out some of the pre-Abrahamic dispensations. But that'd be interesting. Okay, so the Mid-Acts churches use grape juice. I kind of thought that might be the case, but wasn't completely sure there. Paul grew up Catholic, used wine, and I doubt a Catholic would. I think they would probably take this approach that he said wine, use wine. I doubt that Catholics would allow grape juice. I don't know. Paul, do you know? Is there any? I know you can, like some, say, Lutheran churches. The tray is divided, and you can have grape juice on this side and wine on this side. Catholics, I've never been aware of them doing anything but wine. Do you know if they allow it, or would they take this position? This is obviously not a Catholic article. What position would they take there? It'd be interesting to know there. Let me back up here on YouTube. Dima has a note from in her Bible when I was doing the Acts series in 2014 about the overlap of the kingdom and the grace teaching that come there. I'm glad I said something right there. Let's see. Don't drink from the baptismal. Drink from the garden hose. Don't drink from the baptismal. Yeah, I would say don't drink from the baptismal. I'm going to come back, Clint. I'm going to take your question here in just a moment. I want to rise and just check here. That's what I thought. Roman Catholic Church exclusively wine. So, 2 questions, and then we're going to be done for tonight. Got a question from Stephen and a question from Clint. Stephen says, somewhere, I lost his question. Was it Stephen? No, Clint. I got 2 questions from Clint. Clint Stevens. What's your view of baptism? Even though I take what largely is a mid-acts position, I do disagree somewhat that the most mid-acts would take the position that I may overstate their case here, but that baptism is prohibited, at least that they would not do baptism, and whether they would use the word prohibited or not, I don't know. I haven't come to that place yet. I think I see sometimes after Paul receives the mystery and is teaching in what appears to me, and I could be wrong on this, what appears to me to be grace-based assemblies where he's doing some baptism. Now, Corinth, I wouldn't build my argument on Corinth because I think Corinth was largely Jewish, and so that sort of undoes the argument if you build it on Corinth. But I would accept baptism as an observation or a testimony as a witness. I do not take baptism as an ordinance. In fact, I don't believe baptism or the Lord's Supper is an ordinance, which makes me not a very good Baptist. I used to call it an ordinance, but that's just because I listened to everybody who told me it was an ordinance. Yeah, there's 2 ordinances of the church, baptism and the Lord's Supper. Everybody knows that. We learned that in Baptist Training Union. But I would say there's the observation of the Lord's Supper, or the observance of the Lord's Supper, or the observance of baptism, where a person says, I'd like to give a testimony displaying the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and therein lies my trust. And could I give that testimony in that way? I would not prohibit someone from doing that, or a church having that. Now, I think I think even most Baptist churches here overstate their case on that. Most Baptist churches would say, yeah, it's a testimony, it's symbolic, it's not necessary for salvation, and yet they quickly turn around and say, you better do it, buddy, or you're not in fellowship with God. It's an ordinance. You are ordained to do this. I wouldn't go there. So again, I take a little bit of a middle ground position on baptism. And then the second question, and the last one for today, do you think that the rise in paranormal and or alien activity is something that unbelievers could use to explain the rapture to be given over to a strong delusion and believe in the lie, like 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11? Very much so. I think that one indicator that maybe the rapture is near. I'm very hesitant in the way I say that, because I don't think there are prophecies or things that we can mark and say, yep, see, the rapture is near. I think that's an unknown time. But things that lead to a one-world government and things that lead to delusion. Let me speak to it in just a different way. I've spent a lot of time the last few weeks talking about the fact that I disagree with a lot of the government action that has been taken on coronavirus. Now, this perhaps is not the best example, but it shows how easily our society will accept what might be junk science. And if they will literally shut down virtually all business in the world on junk science, then it's not going to be hard to understand that the world will be given over to a strong delusion. And I think that we'll see more and more strong delusions. I think we see this even in, what would you call it, the postmodern generation of today, that they'll insist on all these various genders, for example, 120-something genders I think we're up to. And they really do believe it. That's just a strong delusion. And so I suspect we're going to see more strong delusions. And with that, I think the devil can use demonic activity to mimic alien activity, to appear to be alien activity, and give evidence of this alien activity. And I like the book, and I need to carry this on our website, and I don't have it. Is it Alien Delusion? What's the book by Gary somebody? It's going to come to me. Creation.org. Those people are the ones that have put it out. And he gives a pretty good, book-length argument that it's demonic activity, and I think I would agree with that. Okay, let's just check comments here real quick and see if it's time to go to bed. I know it's getting that way in my part of the world. Let's see. So Paul hadn't been to a Catholic church in a while. What do you know, Paul, right? You come to the Baptist church in Taos when you're here. We always enjoy having you here. Lutheran joke. Never invite just one Baptist to go fishing with you. He'll drink all your beer. Yes, those of you who aren't Baptist might not understand that two Baptists cannot drink. You get one, be careful. Joel, excellent. And I like the way Joel puts this, and I think I would agree with you on this. Joel says baptism is not prohibited. This goes back to the mid-Acts position. Baptism is not prohibited, just not part of Paul's mystery program. I think that's an excellent way to put that. So then it comes, can you do that which is not part of Paul's missionary program? Can you, we've used the word pragmatic a number of times. Can you pragmatically say, hey, this is the way we would like to give our witness and our testimony? That's where I've landed. You could argue against it. I may change my position one of these days on that, but I like the way Joel has put it here, not prohibited, just not part of Paul's mystery program, and therefore would not necessarily, in fact, let's draw off the necessarily, therefore would not be a part of a Pauline church's agenda. And with that, Joel goes back. I'll give him the last word here. Many Baptist churches track their conversions by how many baptisms they've had. I would drop the word many. I think you could probably just say Baptist churches track their conversions by how many baptisms they've had. In all my years in Southern Baptist life, they send you this, it used to be called the Uniform Church Letter. Now it's called the ACP, stands for something. Church profile. I don't know what the A is for. Some kind of church profile that all these churches are supposed to fill out, and they get mad at you if you don't fill it out. And I quit filling them out a long time ago. But, I mean, that's what they want to know. And that really is the key thing they want to know. How many baptisms do you have? So they can put it in the denominational paper, and the Southern Baptist. We had 300,000 baptisms last year. That's a Pentecost every, 30 minutes or whatever. And that is how they track their conversion. So it's interesting. Now, Baptists, of course, grew out of, most would say, at least cousins to the Anabaptist movement. And so baptism was such a part of their early beginning that even again, though they'll all say, we reject baptismal regeneration, but then they immediately will go into, got to be baptized. It's a step, the first step of obedience that you've got to take is baptism. And follow Christ in obedience into the waters of baptism. All those Baptist phrases that they will say. And I think they have overdone it there. Okay, I think that we are good to go. Very delighted to have you. Let me give a programming note. I'll be back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. with Ask the Theologian, taking your biblical, theological, and worldview questions. We'll be all, suited up and go on everything perfectly. My son told me to do a test here. I'm supposed to check the mic. This is mic number 1 I've been using all night. But I tell you what, let's switch. And now I'm on mic number 2. Tell me which one you like better. This is mic number 2. All the other was mic number. I'll close out at mic number 2, and we can listen and see how it sounds here. I won't tell you which is which, but I've been using one, and I just switched to the other. And he told me I should have backup, and we'll see what works best. So tomorrow I will be on Ask the Theologian at 10 a.m. We'll get all fancy in the studio, and we'll have a good time there tomorrow. But tomorrow night we have our Bible study in Galatians, 7 p.m. And I look forward again to seeing you for that. And this has been the Theological Insomniac. I'm Dr. Randy White. It's late. Time to go to bed. It's been late night commentary on the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal. I had fun being with you, and I hope you, my friend, have a delightful evening. Good night, everyone.